The loud screams you hear in the background are not just Democrats and average Americans. They're Republicans who see this as maybe one of the biggest political blunders that I can recall in recent memory. This is a total unforced error. You know, the economy was moving in a relatively good direction. Whether you like what Biden did or not, when he left, you know, the U.S. economy was pretty much the envy of the Western world. Trump inherited a good economy. The jobs report that just came out indicates that things were moving in the right direction, probably. All he had to do was kind of not get in the way, and this is driving the truck off the cliff. I've never imagined that he would do this. And then to do across-the-board tariffs on every product for almost every country at the same time, and then act like you're going to negotiate with all of these at the same. It's ridiculous. I'm not sure what he was thinking when he did this, but I don't know what the exit ramp is. I don't really see one. He's mad at Powell for not giving him one, but Powell did, I think, what people were expecting the Fed to do under these circumstances.
Well, the impact locally for you is very real. It's not just the tariffs here, and that's obviously hitting people across the board. The market reaction hits people across the board. The DOGE cuts, though, hit you directly, with federal workers who live in your district who are being shown the door. Then you add what took place with some of the budget cutting. I know that the House has yet to reverse the budget cuts for the District of Columbia, but people are starting to sit back around here. We're on global television and radio right now. People are listening to you as well on 99.1 FM in Washington saying, hey, wait a minute. The Washington, D.C. area, the DMV, used to be recession-proof because of the fact that the federal government was here, or at least there was a shock absorber, Congressman. Does that exist anymore?
Maybe not. You know, what he's done in the attack on federal employees has been extremely damaging. I mean, he's thrown people's lives up in the air. And I know there's a lot of people who don't have sympathy for so-called bureaucrats, but people are now starting to feel the impact of the services that they're not getting because these people have been fired. And some of these things are going to be very long-reaching and far-reaching. So, you know, cutting the clinical trials for Alzheimer's, cancer, you know, Parkinson's. My father died from Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, a combination of those. So to see the clinical trials derailed just kind of, you know, by happenstance is astonishing. And then the impact on, you know, people who are seeking their PhDs or starting their research careers. We're going to have IonQ on here in a minute, but, you know, China's throwing money at AI, quantum computing, and the like. They're trying to grow as many of these scientists and engineers as possible. Trump's cutting the money for that, and that's just scratching the surface. I mean, you know, we could go through, you know, the impact Medicaid cuts, impact on elementary schools, you know, the impact on local hospitals in rural and urban areas. I mean, it's astonishing, it's far-reaching, it's extremely damaging, and I think when you combine that with the tariffs that he's put in place now, you're certainly looking at a recession in the Washington metropolitan area, but I think you're probably looking at one nationally as well.
You mentioned IonQ. This is a quantum computing company that you introduced us to some months back, and you were joined on the air here by the then CEO. Niccolo de Masi, the president and CEO of IonQ, now in charge of the company, joins us now as part of our conversation. Niccolo, we want to add your voice to what we're talking about here and welcome you to the conversation. With a lot of questions we have about quantum computing and the charge that you have at IonQ, been pretty remarkable hearing you called out by Jensen Huang recently, but there are great concerns now about a company like yours seeing innovation stifled and having more difficulty accessing capital because of what's happening in the financial markets driven by the tariffs. What do you think?
Well, first of all, I want to thank the Congressman for including me in this, and thank the Congressman for all the support that he's given to IonQ. You know, we were born on the University of Maryland campus 30 years ago with Dr. Chris Monroe, and we, of course, do a lot with the university, the ecosystem, with the DMV, and of course with all the associated you know, ecosystem of agencies in the area. You mentioned China. I mean, absolutely, they are investing, you know, probably $15 billion officially in quantum computing, and I bet it's more unofficially given how things work over there. And I would concur that quantum computing and quantum networking, which is the other half of our business, so it's safe making and safe breaking, really are not just the paramount for the national security of our country, but they're fundamental to the economic growth prospects of our economy. And so, we work, of course, across the aisle. We work with the administration, every administration, and it has been a bipartisan issue, which we're grateful for. I mean, our machines are made in America. Our quantum networking also is rolling out in America in places like Tennessee, for example. And ultimately, we believe that tariffs will be a far bigger issue for companies that are structured differently than IonQ. But nevertheless, we look forward to continued support in the state and, of course, federally as we continue to grow this vital technology for our country.
But what about the notion that, at least in terms of China's retaliation against the U.S. policy announced this week, it's not just tariff measures, but also restricting access to critical minerals? Is that something, given the role that those play in quantum computing, that could affect your company?
Well, it can affect some companies in the quantum computing space. Fortunately, it doesn't impact IonQ. Just yesterday, DARPA, in fact, awarded us the first stage of their own journey towards building, let's call it encryption cracking and encryption protection. So, the basis of modern civilization relies on secure communications. Battlefield of the future relies on battlefield of today relies on secure communications. And ultimately, quantum computing helps you both optimize that, and quantum networking helps you ensure that e-commerce, banking, you name it, as we know it today, goes on, perpetually. Right. So this is an issue that, we fortunately are well funded. Our stock, of course, has not had a great day today, but our stock has had a better day than everybody else who's exposed, fully to these measures for sure. We're heartened by the fact that we've got such strong support in Maryland and many other states, as well as in the federal government. They all recognize the criticality of information, the criticality of optimization, the criticality of computing. Jensen Huang will see us as a competitor someday, but at the moment, we're just expanding the compute market with quantum processing units. And our technology that you can see behind me is actually what's called an ion trap quantum computer. And we don't have to import any minerals for this, fortunately.
This is really impressive stuff, Congressman, which is why, of course, you introduced us to IonQ. Knowing that they're working at the University of Maryland, how concerned are you about federal grants being withdrawn or being challenged by this administration and testing the innovation of a company like this?
It's extremely problematic, and we've got other entities. Johns Hopkins is in Baltimore. They're outside of my district, but they just had to lay off 2,000 employees based on what the administration had done as far as cuts. And if we're looking at growing the field of scientists and engineers, they're coming up out of college, out of graduate school, and getting into these professions now. He's wiping out the grants that they use to do their research. He's wiping out the indirect cost payments so that allow these universities to do it. He's wiping out the grants and, in some instances, contracts that go to federal agencies like NASA, where the research is done. So we've got this crop coming up with no place to go here in the United States. While, by contrast with China, they're not only are they, growing more of these people faster, but they're throwing dollars, or the Chinese equivalent of that, into funding it so they can expand it quickly. We're still in the lead, but the president's walking us off the field right now, and when we should be competing and maintaining the lead that we have.
Well, Niccolo, we only have a minute left, but can the private sector make up for anything or the lack, I guess, of investment, or a pullback in investment from the public sector?
We're doing our best, Congressman, for sure. We're trying to grow the job market, our quantum center that we have in partnership with, of course, Maryland and UMD, and we're very much part of, and I think a central tenet of the quantum initiative and expansion of our headquarters to create those research opportunities, create companies and incubation and entrepreneurship around our technology. So, we're well capitalized, and we'll do all we can every day. Needless to say, though, we rely on partnerships with Maryland, the university, the federal government, to ensure that our technology makes it into the commercial sector, the public sector, onto the battlefield, into drug discovery, into let's just call it aerospace of the future and optimization opportunities of the future every day of the week. So let's hope that this is a moment in time, and that it's all up from here for both of us.